Right, well, we still have just a little bit, but it sounds like it's getting quiet, so I guess we can go ahead and jump in. On the way here, I was just blown away, just the beautiful sunset. I'm so glad that we get the extra hour of daylight now. It made for a bit of a harder Sunday, I guess, waking up. But oh man, it's beautiful, and I'm so thankful that we get that extra hour, and it makes it even more enjoyable to come to services. I love walking in as the sun is setting. I don't know why I felt like I had to say that, but just really beautiful. But before we jump into tonight is a continuation of more of a practical part of the tensions, paradox, irony class. So we've kind of gone through different stages. We started with kind of heady, philosophical, theological stuff. And then we've kind of had moments where we've dug into some really practical things that have daily impact in things that we wrestle with day in and day out in the actions that we do and the ways that we think. And we're continuing that tonight. But before we do that, Joe, would you mind opening us up with a prayer?
Sure.
Amen. All right, so tonight the one that we're looking at is good works. And not whether or not good works are bad. We all agree good works are good. But what we want to consider is, this is taken right out of the Sermon on the Mount, so you probably recognize these two expressions. But good works on hilltops or in secret. So you remember toward the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, at the end of the Beatitudes, right after that, Jesus talks about being the city set on a hill, but then shortly after that, he goes into talking about how we pray and how we fast and how we give, that all should be done in secret. And we'll dive into those passages in a moment. But one thing that I want to try that we haven't, I've been wanting to do it in this class because in one sense it's like the perfect class to try this, but on the other hand, it's also a little bit dangerous. So what I want to do, I think it's the first time we've done this, I actually want to split the class in half. Now, some of you are thinking, I feel like the class has already been split in half a couple times. But I want to split it just down the middle. And what I want to do is I want us to think about each side of this issue. And the reason I want to do it is because I feel like this one isn't quite as a debatable of a topic. It's not one that's going to really, I don't think too many of us will deeply wrestle with this after we leave here. But I think having sort of two perspectives will kind of help sharpen the way that we think about this. And I've just kind of been curious about how that would work in, number one, a class of this size, and just with this topic, because it is sort of that dual focus. So be thinking about that in just a second. We'll do that. We'll just take like a minute or two and just turn and talk with the person next to you and make the case, and I'll split that up in a second. But I want to give sort of a kind of a concrete example of what I mean by this, good works on hilltops or in secret. And so this is the one that comes to my mind, and it's kind of a lighthearted one, but one that we're probably all somewhat familiar with. So you finish services, you get to the restaurant that you have debated over in the car, but you finally chose, and you're there, and you sit down, and you're talking, you're visiting, and then the food finally comes. Right? You don't pray over appetizers. Appetizers come pre-blessed, and the food comes, and then what do? The question is to pray or not to pray. Is this something that I should do? And is this possibly a way of letting my light shine? Or is this something that would be better done in secret? And maybe we have different perspectives on that in the room. I've seen it definitely both ways. I've known some families who are like, no way, we do not pray in public situations. That's just it's a sort of pious stance that you're taking. And I've known families, my family, for example, was a little more on the opposite side of it. In fact, my sister's here tonight, and she'll think this is funny. But when we were growing up, my mom she was like, we couldn't go home and change out of our church clothes before eating, because then it would be like, people need to know that we were at services, and they needed to, this is an opportunity to shine our light. So there's like a concrete example of the kind of thing that we're getting at, and that can look like any number of things. It could be praying, it could be any good work that we're talking about. Whatever comes to mind when you think of good deeds, good works, that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. And the question is, well, how do we balance letting our light shine and making sure that we're, the balance between hilltops and being in secret. So let's see. Kyle, on your side of the room, I'll let you. I guess you're the designated team captain here. What would you prefer, hilltops or in secret? And again, this is about making the case for good works to be done on hilltops or in secret.
Rephrase that. I'm not sure I'm following.
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
Choose between these two, or
just choose between these two. And this like half of the room will be making the case for pro whatever you choose.
We're gonna go pro hilltops.
Pro hilltops. Okay, that makes this side of the room pro secret. So just all right, Kyle, you can request a trade for any of your team members. Okay, so we'll start with so this side hilltops, this side in secret, and just turn and talk with the person next to you. We'll take 1 or 2 minutes and just make the case with the person next to you. Okay, why should good works be done on hilltops? All right, and then this side of the room, okay, why should good works be done in secret?
Is there a closet we can go to?
What's
that we can go to on this side?
I'm sorry. Oh, yeah. Yeah, you're welcome to find a closet.
And I was like, yeah, it's fine. Yeah, it is. That's exactly what I want to do.
Praise for something you can get right. Not a motivation to what you do.
Cindy was like, all of them were like,
But it comes down to it.
then she goes,
She
and like sort of talking about it, she's like,
And if you're doing it in order of shame, that's
hardest thing.
good works were done. Our name is put on the name of God. That's where your heart, that's where your conscience and your heart telling you to be.
Sorry, I'll just first take. All right, let's reconvene here. So let's start with, I'm trying to think what is most advantageous for in secret, since they got like first pick. I feel like this side should get the say on what would. Well, let's go with Sarah. What would you prefer, to go first and make the case for in secret, or let good works on hilltops go first and then you can kind of like rebuttal? What would you prefer?
We can go first.
Okay, all right. In secret, so anyone, it's open to anyone. It's not like Sarah's the only one who can talk now. I kind of like that, but what? Let's make the case. Let's start by making the case for good works to be done in secret. What would be some of the? How would you like piece a case together in making a defense for good works in secret? All right, Hilltop. Abigail.
We were talking about how if, obviously, like this is the obvious answer, but if you're doing it in secret, then it's taking away the risk of you doing it for your pride or doing it to be seen by others. And then we were also talking about how if you're helping people or doing whatever good works in secret, and it's just between you and that person or you and a small group, that makes it even more special between you all. It doesn't have to be like this big public thing that you're getting praised for.
Yeah, good point. I like that. Okay, who else? I heard some others.
I was just saying, Jesus says to.
All right. Julia's in the mic drop. All right.
But he also says, let your light shine.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Whose side are you on? Any of yeah.
I think the core message out of the gospel is that we are being internally changed moment by moment, day by day, and we shouldn't need any kind of extrinsic motivation in order to do good, which if a good work is being done out in the open, there's that temptation that we're actually doing it for the recognition that we're going to receive, which would run counter to the heart of the gospel.
Yeah, awesome. Really good point. Any other thoughts?
Well,
Those are
trying
two.
to do it in secret, but it just organically happens that it's not.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the first part of that.
What happens if you're trying to do it in secret, organically, it just happens that it is not in secret. It's not because you didn't start trying to be. In fact, you were just doing the good work because it was there for you to do.
Yeah. There you go. So another good point. I feel like that's I feel like that's a bit of a hilltop point right there. or it's like, okay, so you're saying if there's, you're trying to do it, so you're trying to have like a good heart about it, and then it's like, oh, it just so happens to be public, and then
Because credit is not yours to assign. Credit is to be assigned
right
on you if it happens without your intent being for it to happen.
Right. Okay, I saw one more hand over here.
I was just going to say that doing it in secret can help the focus be on God, and instead of the temptation of it, like was mentioned earlier, it coming our way.
Yeah, really good. Okay, one more.
Hey, Jared, I was going to say that it also, when you do it in secret, you plant a seed in somebody else's heart sometimes, and that might kind of motivate them to do something in secret.
Right.
It's sometimes you get kind of, I don't want to say guilted into doing things. Sometimes if I'm at Chick-fil-A, somebody paid for my meal before, and then, I ask for the person behind me, and it's like $30 or something, and you're kind of like, okay, we're going to stop this right now.
Yeah. Okay. All right. How about okay? So hilltops. Let's see. What's the case being made?
So I want to make a point that secretly, like I'm in secret kind of person, but I mean as there's evidence. But here's the thing: when Jesus is talking about the Pharisee on the corner praying aloud, he's like, instead you should not be like that who's boasting out in public and saying, "Oh, how awesome am I? I have this relationship with God." Instead, you should go in secret. He's talking about something that should be a private conversation with God. It's a personal, private relationship. But I think we should not equate praying necessarily with good works. When we're talking about good works, it shouldn't be on the hilltops if you're seeking the glory for it. But if God is always glorified in what you're doing, then God can't be glorified if it's in secret. And that's not to say to go around boasting, but I mean, there are so many instances and examples of it's like, look what God did. It was never look what I did in Scripture.
Yeah.
He does add giving to the poor. It's not just praying. So it does warrant it some.
Yeah. And we'll dive into the Sermon on the Mount in a second. I like how we're referencing it, and this will be good as we move toward the text.
If you're doing the good works, whatever it is, it needs to glorify God, not you. So how's it going to glorify God if nobody knows that you did it as a Christian for a Christian reason?
Good point.
Would Lydia be an example of someone who ended up on the hilltop even though she did her in secret?
I'm sorry, who was that?
Lydia.
Lydia, yeah, I think
I
Lydia.
mean, she
would
did
be-
her stuff in secret, but it was definitely on the hilltop or on the sea. So
Yeah.
it happened organically.
Yeah, and I like the word organically and naturally. I think that's important that it arises not out of a forced position of trying to make myself known, but that if it happens naturally, yeah.
I think what he said, she did it to glorify God, but in so doing,
Yeah,
she put herself on the hilltop.
yeah, good point.
I think either if we're talking about hilltops or in secret, we can't assign intent at this point. We can't assign
Yeah.
you're doing it on hilltop to be loud about it, or you can't say you're doing it in secret and then immediately by doing it in secret you're now humble about it. Because either way, we can't assign intent in that. So to me, I think it's all about the intent.
Yeah.
This is an example, it's not Church of Christ, okay? But there's a church locally that on certain holidays, probably Christmas or whatever, they go to a local restaurant and they pay for people's meals. And when they do it, they don't even mention their own name. But they do mention Christ and the church. It's not a Church of Christ, but it's
Yeah, that's
not
a neat
Christian church. But they,
Yeah.
I think it's impressive in that they don't say, I'm John Jones, from such and such church. They just say, oh, I'm a Christian, I'm from they do mention the church.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. We're actually I think we'll kind of come back to that in a second. I like that point though about the name or your name not necessarily being attached to it.
I think there can be a difference as well as the purpose, or what we've mentioned intent, and I think that plays a big part of it. But why are we called to be on the hilltop? There's a purpose, and I'm sure we'll get to that in a minute when we talked about the Sermon on the Mount. But it's because we're supposed to be salt of the earth. I mean, we're here for a reason, and that reason and that purpose needs to be known. But there are obviously times where things need to be done in secret so that there's not any attempt for us to gain any of that glory.
Right.
But even when we were on the hilltop, there is recognition of why we are that light and who that light comes from.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, last point.
There's also a proclamation. If I am on that hilltop, whether it be my words or my actions, my children, my grandchildren, anybody else can see and then gain strength and courage from someone not, again, going back to the intent. But if they do know that, they can see that.
Right. Yeah. So it really does, and that's interesting. That similar point has been made actually from both sides, that it can have this sort of ripple effect, or the domino effect, however you want to think about it. But that's a good segue into the text. So let's start in Matthew 5. And again, this comes right after the Beatitudes. So I'll just name those real quick as you turn to it, right? Poor in spirit, those who mourn, the meek, those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, the merciful, the pure in heart, the peacemakers, the persecuted. And then he kind of reiterates that, blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and all kinds of evil. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. And then he goes right into, so just after talking about these Beatitudes, he goes right into the section about salt and light. And so here's what he says, and this has already been referenced, but he says in verse 13, you are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. Okay, so two basic metaphors here that have already been mentioned, salt and light. And when we think about sort of the driving message of that, we could take the time to kind of break down what each of these metaphors mean. But what's the essential point? I mean, what is he getting across? What is Jesus saying here about our good works in general? And you don't have to pick sides anymore. Anybody, you can cross over both sides. We're going to look at both sides of the issue now, and anybody can comment on that. But when you think about what he says in these 3 verses or so, what is he communicating about? What is Jesus saying about our good works? And it's okay if we repeat some of the things we've said already, but what's the essential idea that he's getting across?
It says right,
Influence, I heard. What else?
I mean, it says right there that the purpose is they may be seen,
Yeah.
they may be evidenced, so that God's glory can be increased.
Yeah, and it's interesting. He stresses that shine before others, right? Others witnessing, others looking on, so that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. And it's interesting. So he contrasts, good salt with bad salt. And there was something interesting that I read about. John Stott commented on this idea. Apparently, what Jesus seems to be getting at there with the bad salt. I'm trying not to spend too much time on this. I found it interesting. But there was sort of like a film that would sort of be dusted on the ground. I'm trying to explain this the right way. Basically, it came from salt, but it wasn't, like, the point is not that salt loses its taste or loses its flavor. It's that it becomes so diluted that it becomes like this film on the ground that people would literally trample across. And this was because they were so close to the Dead Sea. I'm not doing a good job of explaining that, but this seems to be exactly what he has in mind, that this is something that has just become like this sort of white film that's just trampled across the ground. And the point is that it loses its essential purpose as mostly as a preservative, to preserve the decay of meat. And for us, maybe the idea is that it preserves the decay of the world, that's an essential part of taking on these Beatitudes and manifesting them in our own lives. But then he also sets up a contrast with, the city set on the hill, and the lamp that illuminates the whole house with the lamp that's hidden under a basket. And it's essentially the same point, right? It serves no purpose, and it's kind of comical. I think there are several things throughout the Sermon on the Mount that Jesus intends to be comical, that his audience would have found humorous. And I think this is one of those. Some of these illustrations he uses, but hiding this candle under a basket, this lamp under, it makes no sense. Why would you do that? So you see this on one hand, right? We're to be influential. We're to let our light shine. We're to be the salt of the earth, to be distinct and different and set apart and noticeably set apart. And to lose that influence, to either compromise it by our own refusal to live it out, or to conceal it, to do it in such a way that nobody else ever knows about it. To either compromise or to conceal it is to lose our purpose. So interesting. So that's what he sets forth, and then the phrase at the last there, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father. We won't pause and talk about this, but real quick, I want us to think about what are some of the reasons why we might conceal our influence. I think it's a really important question. We'll come back to something at the end, I think, if there's time. Because I think for me, there's something about my concealing of my influence or my light that kind of raises this tension where I wonder, to shine or not to shine, to let my works be known or not. But I think it comes with that question, okay, well, what are some of the reasons why I might conceal my influence or hide my light? And maybe several reasons are coming to your mind. But let's jump over to Matthew chapter 6. So this again was referenced by both sides here. And I think we have enough time to read right through it. So I'll read fairly quickly, but beginning there in verse 1 of Matthew chapter 6, it says, Jesus says this, beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them. For then you will have no reward from your Father who's in heaven. Thus, when you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be praised by others. And I think that's another example of a kind of humor that Jesus is throwing out there. He says, truly, I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And when you pray, you must not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners, that they may be seen by others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you pray, go into your room and shut the door, and pray to your Father who's in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not keep up empty phrases as the Gentiles do, for they think that they will be heard for their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. Pray then like this. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For if you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. And then he uses the last of these three things, fasting. And when you fast, do not look gloomy like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces that their fasting may be seen by others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, that your fasting may not be seen by others, but by your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Okay, so a couple, just two quick questions about this. First of all, in this section, these 18 verses, what does Jesus say not to do? What does Jesus say not to do, not to be like in these 18 verses? To be seen, right? He reiterates that multiple times. Verse 1, beware practicing your righteousness before them. Verse 3, when you give, don't let your right hand know what your left hand is doing, or maybe have that backwards. Verse 5, when you pray, don't be like the hypocrites, to be seen by others. Verse 16, when you fast, do not look gloomy like the hypocrites, to be seen by others. So over and over again, he's saying, I mean, it's the classic, don't be like that guy. Don't be the kind of person who does these things only to be seen by others.
Well, it's funny because in the first verse, he could really just, this 1 through 18 could literally just be verse
absolutely.
1. Because he says there, to be seen by them. Don't do this to be seen by them. And then he just goes on for the next 17 verses to give us example after example of what not to do, basically.
Which is really interesting to think about. Like, there's not a
our
whole lot
humanness
of...
needed that.
Right, yeah, and it's really, I think that's a really good point. I mean, there's not a whole lot of real estate in this sermon. We don't know that we have every single word of the Sermon on the Mount. Could have been longer, but this is what we have recorded, and there's not a whole lot of space there for him. So for Jesus to go on and spend this much time addressing this issue, I think it's a really good point. But then what does he say to do? So don't do this to be seen by others. But there's another phrase that comes up, and what is that? Instead, what does he ask of us? What does he, I guess, command of us?
In secret.
In secret. Yeah, it's interesting. I think I counted like 5 times. I might be off on that number. But it's the same kind of thing. You see this throughout each section. Verse 4, your giving may be in secret. Your Father who's in secret. Verse 6, your Father who is in secret. Verse 18, talking about fasting, that your fasting not be seen by others, but by your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And I know that's getting redundant, but that's the point. He's emphasizing, okay, not to be seen by others, but that phrase, in secret, in secret, in secret. So here's the tension. And we've already stated this, and I think we've really driven this tension home. I think we set it up well at the beginning, sort of splitting teams up there. But this is the tension. First, Jesus says, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works. And then he follows that up with beware of practicing your righteousness before others. Do it in secret, and don't even know what your other hand is doing with the other hand. I don't want to have it backwards. And so here's the question. Okay, is Jesus contradicting himself? And I went ahead and filled that one in for us. I think we're all in agreement. Both sides, we're on the same team on this one. No, Jesus, of course, he's not contradicting himself here for some of the reasons that we've already talked about. But if he's not contradicting himself, and this is where we all come together on the same team, what is Jesus really getting at here? As we look at this contrast, what is Jesus really driving home, especially in these two sections, but really you could say, I mean, this is the essence of the Sermon on the Mount, but what is Jesus really getting at here?
I think something that stuck out to me in both of the sections was intent. So in the, letting your light shine, the end of it is super important, that they may see your good works and give glory to your God, to your Father who's in heaven. And then in the passage about doing things in secret, over and over again we see phrases like, in order to be seen by them, so that it would be seen by them. And so it's there probably, I think I counted 4 or 5 different times where that type of phrase is used to get to the intent of why it's being done. So it's not that he's saying don't do these things, he's saying don't do them to be seen.
Right.
So the light is still going to be able to be shown because you're still going to be doing them, but you're not doing it for the intent of being seen and praised for it.
Yeah, really, really well said. It comes down to that intent, and he emphasizes that a lot, especially in that second part. Any other thoughts on that? I know we're probably all going to basically say very similar things here, but let's keep going.
I think he almost kind of sums it up if you keep on reading in chapter 6, where he says, don't store for yourself treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy. But then he goes on to say, but store for yourself treasures in heaven. And so there's treasure to be had in secret, and there's treasure to be had on the hilltop, because there's great gain in both. And it's a matter of storing up that treasure of recognizing God's glory and giving him glory, and also storing up for yourself treasure by presenting yourself as a Christian.
Yeah.
And I think that it goes back to intent as well, but he's talking about where is your treasure being stored?
Yeah, it's interesting how I think that's such a good observation, because it's interesting, sometimes we look at the Sermon on the Mount and it can seem kind of broken up, but when you start thinking about it through, okay, how does this all tie together? It's interesting how one section flows right into the other. So I think that's a really, really good point. I saw some other hands around. So.
Yeah, I just want to make the point that I think also this is a call to be really cautious not to fall in the trap of pride, because pride can very often, we want to receive God's glory. We do. I mean, we're stealing it from him whenever we say that we've done any good thing. I like to compare the relationship often to that of a father and a son or daughter. If I give my son $20 and I say, go and, help the next homeless person you see find food. And then my son goes and he says, I did this for you. It's, no, I told you to do that for them, and that's God. He's like, I told you to do this for them, and you should point them back to me to be glorified. And it's easier to not steal that glory when we're doing it in secret. But on the flip side, when good works are being done on earth, people will talk about it. You see it all the time with Jesus. People couldn't keep their mouths closed. They just wanted to go, even if he tried to keep them quiet, and they just wanted to go and say, look what has been done for me. And I think we don't have to worry about that part. I think other people will do that, and as long as we're pointing them in the right direction, that'll be glorified.
Really, really good point. Yeah.
Kind of piggybacking off what he just ended with, that no matter what good you do, someone is going to know. No matter how secret it is, someone's going to know. It may be backtracking a little bit, but kind of the hilltops versus in secret. I was thinking, going back to Matthew chapter 5 when he said, let your light so shine before men. Our first thought is to think men or they is multiple people. Men could literally just be one person. And that's all. That's still technically in secret. If you're doing one good thing for one person, are you still shouting it from the hilltops? No, it's still technically in secret, but you're still glorifying God and they're saying glory to God through you, still kind of in secret. So I think
Yeah.
our first instinct is to think, oh, big light up on a hill, something, or that's something that's big and it has to be with a bunch of people, but literally men, they could be one person.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And one thing that is kind of interesting that I'll just mention real quick, one difference between these two sections is when he talks about you be salt, be light, it seems like he's talking more in the collective. One grain of salt doesn't really change much. One light, that can do a difference, but if it's just one light on a hilltop way far away, that's not going to make, but it seems like there he's talking about the collective, when we as disciples, as the church, live out these Beatitudes, we collectively become the salt of the earth in the light of the world. That's not to say that that doesn't have ramifications for us individually, it absolutely does. But I think it's interesting, he talks about the collective, but to your point, the number of people that we serve through those Beatitudes, that could be one, that could be, who knows, it could be 1,000, who knows how many. But yeah, I really like that point. Let's go with one. I saw a couple hands. We'll go with those two in the back. So whoever wants to go.
I was just going to say, it's interesting, Jesus kicks off his ministry, his sermon, talking about service and humility and not to let pride get in the way of your works and everything. But then he kind of ends up his ministry teaching in the last week of his life in chapter 23, where he does the woes to the Pharisees, and he kind of explains the danger of doing things in public, and he talks about it, and in verse 5 he says everything the Pharisees do is done for people to see, and then he just he's elaborating it a ton, and you contrast that with the whole middle part of the book, well, in the end, is all Jesus humbly serving, humbly letting his light shine. But boy, he, both ends is pointing out the hypocrite.
Right, absolutely. Let's go with one more.
What Jesus to me is getting at here is our heart, which kind of goes with the intent. Where's your treasure? It's your heart.
Yeah, absolutely. So heart, intent, motivation. One thing I want to mention, one thing that I think is important to point out about these two sections, and I think we kind of made this distinction earlier, but in the first part, there are kind of two different kinds of, I guess, good deeds. There's what he's talking about when he's saying be salt, be light, does seem to lean more so on the outworking of the Beatitudes and the good deeds, the good works that we do that we might typically think of. And then when he gets into this other section in Matthew 6, it seems to be more good deeds in the sense of like religious piety kind of thing. So I think that is an important distinction to make, just to be fair to the text. But we see the same, we mentioned other verses that go right along with what Jesus is saying there. You already mentioned, Julia, Matthew 23, the woe to the Pharisees, about the good works that they're doing to be seen by others. Paul talks about not working for the approval of man, but of God. And then John 8:54, I think it's interesting, slightly pulling this out of context just a little bit, but I just love this statement. Jesus answered to the Pharisees, if I glorify myself, my glory means nothing. It is my Father who glorifies me. But let's get at what we've been hitting at this whole time, and what it comes down to is exactly what you said. It comes down to motivation, right? And what's the motive of the Matthew 6 kind of person in whatever good works it might be, whether it is sort of the religious praying, fasting, giving, or it's the good deeds that we might typically think of. Well, the first one is so that you may be seen by others. And then in the second, the motivation is so that, and there's kind of two things that play right into each other, they may see your good works. And I want to pause on that for a moment. In the first one, it's so that you may be seen. But in the second, it's so that they may see, not you, which goes back to the name thing that I thought was really interesting. Right? Not that your name and your face and your person is associated with that good work or that good deed, but that they see it. And if you're there and you're a part of it, and they happen to know your name, well, more power to you, I guess. But it's so that they may see your good works, and as a result, right, and here's the end goal, here's that motivation, here's the treasure in heaven, that they may glorify your Father. I should capitalize the F. I try to always capitalize the H's and the F's, and when it's God or Jesus, sometimes I miss it. But glorify your Father who is in heaven. Right, so there's our motive. In the first one, I just want to make one quick comment about that. There's a phrase that came to mind. I hadn't really thought about it in its connection to Matthew 6 before. But in that first one, there's a phrase that you may have heard recently, virtue signaling. I'm not sure if that's a word. I was kind of trying to gauge, like, yes, no, heard of it, maybe, I don't know. But virtue signaling, a lot of times it has more of a political ring to it, maybe. But virtue signaling is just like it sounds. It's signaling to other people through maybe the words that you say or the actions that you take or the way that you go about doing it or what you post on social media, signaling in as subtle a way as you can. That's also not so subtle so that they know, but it's subtle so that they don't know that you're thinking, it's like, but you're signaling to them how virtuous of a person that you are. And that really seems to be, what Jesus is talking about is ancient Pharisaical virtue signaling. But that was just a helpful term that made me think about that.
Just get your take on, and this is, I think, on the subject of an athlete. I know you've seen them after they run for 4 touchdowns and done this and done that.
Right, Tebow.
They get a thing and say, all the glories to God, not to me. I don't know how that comes across sometimes.
That's a great point. It's funny. I was just talking with Ms. Casebolt earlier about this earlier in the day, and it wasn't specifically about athletes, but what we were talking about right as we ended that conversation was, it has to come down to the individual. And I think the same principle that you're talking about there comes down to whether or not I pray before I eat a meal in public. It's got to come down to the individual. And when I see that on
sincere or not
right,
sincere.
right. And when I see that, in another person, there's no way for me to know their heart or intention. The way I think of it is what Jesus says: "He who is not against us is for us." And when I look at that, I think that's a way in which whatever their intent is, the glory of God is being made known in some way, small or large. And I think that's something that is a great thing. Let's there's one last thing that I want to get to. The motivation thing, we know that, right? That was like from the very first comment that was made at the very beginning of class. That's what it comes down to. But that's can be really easy to see, or at least we think we see it in other people. We can tell when someone is sounding the trumpet and disfiguring their face and going on the street corner. Maybe people aren't doing that today, but we know what that looks like in our modern terminology. We can detect that, but it's really hard to see in ourselves. And so the question is, well, how can I measure that? What are some ways that we can measure our motivation? And we don't have time to really discuss that. But I want to mention just 3 things that I think are evident in the Matthew 6 part of this. And the first is, maybe you could say it as a statement, or you could maybe ask yourself this question: am I doing this in secret? Whatever it is, am I doing it in secret? Would I also do this in secret? And we can think of, maybe we could think of it like this. You go to someone's funeral at the end of their life, and you've probably witnessed this. You hear stories, you hear things that they did, good works that they did that no one had any idea about until that time. But it's amazing, and it moves us, and it has that ripple effect, and it encourages us to go and do likewise. And I need to be asking myself, in order to measure my motive, am I doing this in secret? Then along with that, am I doing it when there's no reward? It's really easy to do good works when I'm rewarded for it, when I'm seen as a virtuous person, or that I receive some benefit because of it. And then the last thing is, do I do it when it costs me something? And maybe that's the hardest of all. But that is the one that I think we would say is the most manifest in the life of Christ. It cost him everything. And you think about, I forget who mentioned before, but all the people that he healed and who went and told, Jesus even being near some of the people that he did good deeds for, completely ruined his reputation and sent him down a very quick path toward the cross. And you think about, we'll close with this, I mean, Philippians 2, right? Jesus, he though he existed in the form of God, didn't regard equality with God a thing to be grasped, but he emptied himself. It cost him everything. And those are three ways that I can check my motives when I work through this tension and try to navigate this tension of hilltops or in secret. These three things are, I think, a way of thinking about it. But I appreciate the comments. I appreciate the back and forth, and look forward to next time.